All right, so welcome friends to another Law of One study group session. We're going to be covering session 25 today. And before we get into the reading, I just want to take a moment and thank all the beings and entities who are attending, who we can't see, all the Confederation entities, all the interplane entities, all of our support and guides that are here with us to support this working and support our evolution and our continued polarization along the positive path. And I want to offer a special thanks to Ra, those of Ra, who gave these teachings and help us to grasp the philosophy of oneness. And also a special thanks to the LL Research Group, who brought this information through and continues to steward it in such a beautiful and generous way. So yeah, sharing my thanks and gratitude to all those entities whose efforts and whose love help us to be here and gather in the way that we are gathered in this format. Much love, much thanks. All right, so we have a pretty short but powerful, some powerful topics in session 25 today. So let's get into it. Anybody feel like starting off with the reading? Maybe read the opening and the first 3, maybe through 25:3. Beej, you feeling it?
I'll read.
Thank you.
I was holding off in case somebody wanted to jump in. Okay. Session 25, February 16th, 1981. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. We communicate now. Questioner, asking first, what cause or complex of causes has led to the instrument's chest cold, as it is called? I am Ra. This distortion towards illness was caused by the free will of the instrument in accepting a chemical substance which you call LSD. This was carefully planned by those entities which do not desire this instrument to remain viable. The substance has within it the facility of removing large stores of vital energy from the ingester. The first hope of the Orion entity which arranged this opportunity was that this instrument would become less polarized towards what you call the positive. Due to the conscious efforts upon the part of this instrument, using the substance as a programmer for service to others and for thankfulness, this instrument was spared this distortion and there was no result satisfactory to the Orion group. The second hope lay in the possible misuse of the most powerful means of transmission of energy between your peoples in the area of body complex distortions. We have not previously spoken of the various types of energy blockages and transfers, positive and negative, that may take place due to participation in your sexual reproductive complex of actions. This entity, however, is a very strong entity with very little distortion from universal green ray love energy. Thus, this particular plan was not affected either, as the entity continued to give of itself in this context in an open or green ray manner, rather than attempting to receive or to manipulate other self. And there's a footnote, Ra possibly intended to say deceive. The only remaining distortion available, since this entity would not detune and would not cease sharing love universally under this chemical substance, was simply to drain this entity of as much energy as possible. This entity has a strong distortion towards busyness, which it has been attempting to overcome for some time, realizing it not to be the appropriate attitude for this work. In this particular area, the ingestion of this substance did indeed, shall we say, cause distortions away from viability due to the busyness and the lack of desire to rest. This instrument staying alert for much longer than appropriate. Thus, much vital energy was lost, making this instrument unusually susceptible to infections, such as it now experiences. Questioner. The second question the instrument requested was, how may I best revitalize myself, not only now, but in the future? I am Ra. This instrument is aware of the basic needs of its constitution, those being meditation, acceptance of limitations, experiences of joy through association with others, and with the beauty as of the scene, and the exercising with great contact, whenever possible, with the life forces of second density, especially those of trees. This entity also needing to be aware of the moderate but steady intake of foodstuffs, exercise being suggested at a fairly early portion of the day and at a later portion of the day before the resting. Questioner. The third question that she requested to be asked was, how may Dawn and Jim help to revitalize me? I am Ra. This is not an appropriate question for full answer. We can say only that these entities are most conscientious. We may add that due to this instrument's distortion towards imbalance in the space-time nexus, it would be well were this entity accompanied during exercise.
Thanks, BJ. Yes, this is all essentially contact maintenance related, but there's some interesting metaphysical principles at play here. So this session 25 happened on February 16th, and in sessions 18 and 19, I think is when we first learned about Ra, mentioned that Carla had ingested LSD, and I think that was about 12 days ago. So in the intervening time between February, whatever it was, 4th or 2nd or whatever it was, between then and now, I think they're commenting on the effects on Carla that kind of accumulated to cause the cold that she's experiencing now. And they get a little bit more into the intention of the Orion entity who, somehow affected the plan for Carla to be offered LSD and take it, and all the intentions they had to try to use that opportunity as a detunement or as a way to try to divert her from her service to others and her course and her work. Any questions or comments about any of that?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to point out, that even people that are law of one aware, are aware of negative entities, are aware that there are all levels of them, from something as small and annoying as fleas to other parasitic entities, all the way up the ladder and all the way down. That is something I think is important to keep in mind, that sometimes things outside of ourselves are, that we say, like, this isn't me, is sometimes important to note that usually when a person's saying that, like, it really isn't them. So this, I feel like, is one of the things that is not talked about enough. And it's something that a lot of us, and anybody walking the path of light, is going to have temptations or things kind of planted as obstacles in our way along the path, other than our pre-incarnative choices around that. There are these moments that are just described here that are kind of often overlooked, or may have a thought and then brush it away because we think we're the only ones thinking that thought. But I feel like this is an under discussed thing that happens. And I feel like if people were more aware that that was even a possibility, that it could be very helpful along people's path.
I can't hear you, Aaron.
Sorry. I tried to, or I pulled up, I don't know if you all have read the commentary that Jim and Carla gave. So, when they published book 5 in the original series of books, Jim and Carla offered their personal commentary on some of the content that they had removed from the sessions in the original 4 books, because it was very personal. It was, originally when they published the books, they tried to kind of pull out the stuff that they felt it was just about them as a group, personal maintenance stuff. And then they decided, you know what, it's important that everyone hears this stuff too. So they published it in book 5, and then they gave commentary on it. So I went back to I went back to session 18. And because I remember Jim and Carla both talked about, they gave their personal reflections on what happened with this whole LSD thing. And now somehow I'm not able to find it, but I remember Jim said specifically, they decided to call what some people call a psychic attack. They, in the end, decided to call it psychic greeting. So they were aware that they were being offered Orion contact by this 5th density negative entity. But Jim's talk, he comments on how they made a really conscientious choice to view it as a greeting and an offering. This negative entity was offering its service to them. And, they were self-aware that they weren't interested in being enslaved. They weren't interested in stopping the work with Ra. They weren't interested in detuning themselves. But they were interested in using the opportunity of being contacted by a high-level Orion entity, as an opportunity to practice seeing all as one, seeing all that comes to them as like an exercise in, how is this me too? How is this part of the creator? How is this part of my larger self? And that just really seems like such a powerful choice that they made. And I think I imagine it's a big part of how they're able to weather the storm of, being offered psychic greeting by a high level Orion. And I don't have the quotes up in front of me right now. I was hoping to read it, but it's hard for me to sometimes find it on the fly. But but that's the essence of it. Jim said, we chose not to call it psychic attack when these things would happen. We chose to call it psychic greeting, and realize we're being greeted and offered something by a part of ourselves, a part of our larger selves. And anyway, I found that really, really powerful, and thought it was a really interesting thing to make note of.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. It resonates with me. Like, at least what I find in inquiry, when there's something that I don't want to happen, or that I think at least that I don't want to happen, there's a strengthening of my focus and a strengthening of my will, in a way that's like, I think that's a lot of what we're here to do, is sharing our unique love of the creator requires finding out what we love. And for instance, it's so easy to, when there's only beautiful things happening, like it's so easy to start taking them for granted and just like, oh, whatever, you know, so it's beautiful all the time or something. You know, this person is always good to me and I take them for granted. But then in the contrast, you know, like, oh, potentially I might lose this relationship, for instance, then to come into contact with how important that is. And I feel it strengthens a part of me when I get in touch with that. And like, yeah, I feel like that there's such an importance to me of the kind of gesture of I love you, and also no, you know, like I love you and I'm so glad this is happening and I'm not interested. And like those two together feel really powerful.
Yeah, totally. Nanette?
Oh, yes. I know when I was first reading this, and I still hold to this idea, their motives were pure and noble, and probably in the long run correct. But I think that they were naive in their estimation of the power and the influence of the negativity and the sophistication of the entity, and that it could not be tired out like we are in 3D. It had untapped energy reserves that Carla certainly didn't have as a human being. So I don't think at that point they were understanding the danger of this connection. But because of the power of their love, they were able to, well, in the long run, I don't know that they really survived it, because you see what happens toward the end with Dawn and everything. But yeah, I think that at that point, they were of a very noble state of mind and really naive about who they were dealing with, what they were dealing with. So
Yeah.
it was, yeah, a fool's rush in where angels fear to tread. But
Yep.
maybe that's why we, rush in, so we can find these things.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing is it's really, I mean, from my perspective, if we look back at what, this whole dynamic of them navigating this contact with the Orion entity, it just really brings up the whole exercise of navigating love and wisdom, and the balancing of love and wisdom. And, I agree with you, Nanette. I imagine that they probably were very naive. And I think any of us would be, like in third density veiled condition, like how on earth could we know what the powers of a fifth density negative entity would be?
Absolutely.
Like, of course we couldn't know, because that's not where we're at. And it seems to me like they did kind of like, in general, the three of them kind of took an attitude of love first. And then, the wisdom would have been more of like maybe a technical understanding of like, wait, who is this entity actually? And what are their capabilities? And who knows, had they known that, had they had that wisdom, they might not have chosen to continue. They might have chosen to end the contact, but they didn't. And because they didn't, this work, the law of one, is available to the world. And oh my goodness, what a gift, right? So
excellent point. Yes, they were willing to, their courage is remarkable.
Totally remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Foolhardy, perhaps.
With love. Yeah.
Yeah, with love. Exactly.
Yeah. That was their power. That was their protection.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments on that part before we move on? I mean, I have one, but it's a little bit, it's not even a little bit, it's totally transient. It's a little bit confusing to me that the mechanisms of the Orion entities, it seems like somewhere along the line, they were orchestrating the offer to Carla of the LSD, and then also the the sort of nature of the interaction that Carla had with whoever it was. it seems like it was a friend, like an old friend of Carla's offered her LSD. She had never tried it before. But she was, surrounded by people who were experimenting with psychedelics, think about the time that she was growing up. And it wasn't until 1981 that she tried it. She was 38 years old. And it was a trusted friend from somebody she had known for a long time. So it seems like the entity who offered her LSD was doing it from a place of care and love and friendship. But somehow this Orion entity was maybe able to influence the friend of Carla's to anyway. I mean, we can't know, but there's this curiosity I have about wait, how was the Orion entity even involved in this? Because it just seems like a friend of Carla's just offered her some LSD because they knew that she had never taken it. And she was thrilled by the offer because she was, she had been curious, but she just never had the opportunity or the context to do it. And then there's some backstory about Don was pretty against it. He was a pretty straight-laced guy, and he was pretty against, breaking the law, basically. And LSD was, at this point illegal. And so she didn't want Don to know. And then Don only found out because he was interviewing Ra through Carla. Such a fascinating story. Carla told him, but it wasn't Carla. It was Ra through Carla that let him know that she had taken LSD, because she wasn't intending to tell him because she knew he might be upset about it. And then after this whole thing happened, the three of them had a meeting about it, and they decided to go ahead and make a commitment to not using drugs or not doing anything illegal for the rest of the Ra contact after this happened.
Very interesting. Of course, LSD, I never had any good experiences. They were interesting, but terrifying. Better with peyote or psilocybin, that's much more natural. But yeah, I mean, that was intense.
Yeah.
So I could see where that could be so easily co-opted, and for the polarity of the negative, so easy to go that way. Just through confusion and separation.
Right. I mean, it really speaks to Carla's innate strength in her love and her green ray. Her experience that she reported was that she had a blissful experience on LSD. And so many people have at least a mixed experience, some bliss, but some confusion. And some people have really bad trips, but she had no bad, while she was on the medicine, she wasn't, on the psychedelic, she didn't have a bad trip at all. And I think it really speaks to her bias, the bias she had towards love.
Well, just to finish, I always approached it not as a recreation, but from a spiritual standpoint. And I think that might have been protective for me, because I did not see it as fun and games at all. It was very serious stuff to undertake. So I think that was helpful.
Yeah. I imagine so. Mike?
Yeah, I was just surprised and found it interesting that such a small, I mean, I understand taking that as a big deal, but it's like a small little thing that happens in your life could have such a large impact. Because if you think about, if you put yourself in the Orion group's viewpoint and you're trying to do something to detune, make her less towards the positive, you would think, or at least I would think, of much grander things, and much more overt type things. And so the understanding of the subtleties of life and the energies around us that can be manipulated in very subtle ways is interesting to me. And scary to me too, that it's that, because I could see myself stumbling down different paths so easily.
Yeah, this comes up, this is something I've observed over the years of facilitating this discussion. Comes up a lot. People learn about what happened to the LL group and to Carla specifically, and the danger she was in, and it's naturally, it brings up fear, because the the implications were pretty big, were pretty large in terms of what the potential danger that she was in. But then it's also important to remember that like they were channeling Ra. They were channeling a sixth density entity. None of us are doing that. None of us are creating the kind of metaphysical light on the inner planes that they were. You know what I mean? Like we're not being targeted by fifth density negative Orion beings, which isn't to say that there's not lessons for us to be taken away about. We are being influenced. We are being offered in our, you know, in our inner, just in our inner awareness, we're being offered negative philosophy in all sorts of subtle ways. But in terms of, you know, having to navigate the kinds of danger that they were navigating, my interpretation is that for most people, it's just not even on our radar. It's like we're not targeted by the same kind of negative magicians that Carla was being targeted by.
Right.
And so, you know, take it all with a grain of salt and, you know, learn what we can learn. And, you know, it's interesting to know. I think it's interesting and helpful to be on the positive path and understand that there is a dimension of invisible influence that we're all constantly undergoing, whether it's positive or negative. So, yeah. Okay, so let's get into the next section. So now we're getting back into the rhythm of questions that Don is asking about, kind of reviewing third density and reviewing the contact made by the Confederation and by Orion. So we're on 25.4. Does anyone want to read a few? I'll read. Questioner, thank you. We shall now continue with the material from yesterday. You stated that about 3,000 years ago, the Orion group left due to diaspora. Was the Confederation then able to make any progress after the Orion group left? I am Ra. For many of your centuries, both the Confederation and the Orion Confederation busied themselves with each other upon planes above your own, shall we say, planes in time-space, whereby machinations were conceived and the armor of light girded on. Battles have been and are continuing to be fought upon these levels. Upon the Earth plane, energies had been set in motion, which did not cause a great deal of call. There were isolated instances of callings, one such taking place beginning approximately 2,600 of your years in the past, in what you would call Greece at this time, and resulting in writings and understandings of some facets of the law of one. We especially note the one known as Thales and the one known as Heraclitus, those being of the philosopher career, as you may call it, teaching their students. We also point out the understandings of the one known as Pericles. At this time, there was a limited amount of visionary information which the Confederation was allowed to telepathically impress. However, for the most part, during this time, empires died and rose according to the attitudes and energies set in motion long ago, not resulting in strong polarization, but rather in that mixture of the positive and the warlike or negative, which has been characteristic of this final minor cycle of your beingness. Okay, so I want to read you guys ChatGPT's summary of some of those Greek philosophers, because it's pretty cool to know about. Okay, so Thales. Thales, considered one of the 7 wise men of ancient Greece, is often regarded as the first philosopher in Western history. He lived around 624 to 546 BC. While no written records of his teachings exist, his ideas have been transmitted through later sources. Okay, so that's 2,600 years ago, right? That's 2023 plus 624. That's exactly the time period that Ra is talking about. Thales is most famous for his focus on the concept of a single fundamental substance as the origin of all things. he believed that water was the fundamental principle underlying the universe. According to Thales, water could transform into various forms, and everything in existence ultimately derived from or could be reduced to water. His emphasis on seeking a natural, rational explanation for the origin and nature of the world marks a shift from mythological explanations to early scientific inquiry. Thales laid the groundwork for future Greek philosophers, particularly those of the Milesian school, in exploring the underlying principles of the natural world. So, major figure. He was exploring oneness, but kind of had the perspective that water as a substance was perhaps potentially the source or the unifying substance behind all phenomenon. All right, and then Heraclitus lived a little bit more contemporary after Thales. Heraclitus lived around 535 to 475 BC, and he was a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher known for his doctrines on change, unity of opposites, and the concept of the logos. So that's big. And the key aspects of Heraclitus's teachings include the doctrine of change. Heraclitus famously stated that everything flows, Heraclitus famously stated that, quote, everything flows. He believed that change is the fundamental nature of the universe. He emphasized that nothing is permanent and all things are in a constant state of flux. The second primary aspect of his teaching is the unity of opposites. Heraclitus proposed that opposites are interconnected and complementary. He expressed this idea with the famous quote, the path up and down are one and the same. He saw a dynamic harmony in the tension between opposites, suggesting that conflict and change are essential for the world's order. And he also was exploring the idea of the logos. Heraclitus introduced the concept of the logos, a principle of order and knowledge that governs the universe. Yeah, so I just wanted to share that. Pericles was not a philosopher. He was a statesman. He was kind of a politician, but he was he was really interested in democracy and the idea that everybody in society should take part in in setting the course of the collective governance and the society that they're taking part in. So I'll just leave it at that. Y'all can explore more if you want.
That was very helpful. This all happened, Thales and Pericles and number of them were around the same time, around 600 BC.
Right.
Yeah, something was going on around then.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like the Greek society, the Greek, the philosophers, and the way that they were, the way they had sort of structured their society, was another one of these big points of history, human history, where there was a genuine calling and an exploration of oneness. These deep thinkers, like trying to explore the nature of reality and kind of circling around oneness as a philosophical root or foundation. Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that, in that where you said Heraclitus saw the oneness in up and down, which to me is a mind-boggling conclusion to come to without some sort of inner seeking, inner knowledge. You just never would, as a human, you wouldn't go there. And society back then was so focused, it seems like, on deep thought. It's interesting to hear it put that way and think, yeah, that's exactly the law of one.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, totally. I agree. BJ?
Just a minor comment. Well, actually, a couple. One is a curiosity, Nanette, if you wanted to share what you put in the comments about Dewey Larson. But then the other minor comment is there was a book that I read years ago by Stephen Mitchell, and it was just like an anthology of mystics and sages throughout the ages. And I remember reading what he had put in about the writings of Heraclitus and just feeling really drawn to that. Yeah, I don't remember what it was exactly, but I just remember feeling really drawn to Heraclitus.
Who was the author? And the author was
Stephen Mitchell.
Stephen Mitchell.
He's a Stephen
Oh,
Mitchell.
thank you.
Yeah, he's a philosopher and
okay.
a translator. He translated the Tao Te Ching and the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, he's a cool guy.
And he married Byron Katie.
Oh. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Nanette, did you want to say anything about your comment about Dewey Larson?
Oh, well, it's I'm not a physicist, and it's actually written for lay people. So there's very little in terms of formula. But I'm reading Beyond Space and Time, which is one of his books. And actually, I've been going through it rather slowly because he's presenting his postulates. But it makes, I believe that the raw material refers to Dewey. I'm sure that it does, as this is really 4D physics. So it was going to be more applicable under the 4D energetics.
Yeah.
And people would understand it under that. Because right now it was considered more fringe, it's more significant. But yeah, it's really wonderful to read the way he presents things, the way he argues from a scientific and a methodical approach, and he builds on known science. He doesn't reject what's going with the current science. So it's very integrative. And if you like that kind of thing, it's quite inspiring. It's very good.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Nanette. I actually, when I read this piece about Heraclitus and, this thing of he had this doctrine of change. And again, he says, he famously stated that everything flows, or in Greek, it's pantareia. But everything flows. I literally thought of Dewey Larson when I read that, because Dewey Larson is his like essential kind of, his essential model is that everything is in motion. Like motion is the primary, phenomena of space-time. Everything's moving.
Yes.
Motion and change are the primary thing that indicates, what is the nature of space-time.
Well, and according to the relativity, the concept we have, space is a container, and within that, things happen in what we describe as time. But with Dewey Larson, there's no container, there's motion. And so space and time are reciprocal aspects of that motion.
Right.
So that kind of takes the container away and takes it away from the 3D. It just like my mind went kablooey. It was just like, wow, it's just too much. It's so great.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm glad we, talked about this.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for bringing that up. And I also will just plug that same concept we're talking about here about motion and change. It also is a core part of Walter Russell's teachings in terms of, everything in existence is, vibration or movement, and it's expressing the infinite idea of the creator. So it's, there's all these overlaps of these systems that we've, that some of us
that does. Yeah. Walter Russell. I'll remember that and look that up. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Sean?
There's just something small that I picked up on that I thought was interesting, which is like the fact that these battles are happening in time space. I just find that interesting because at least in our science fiction, we assume everything happens in space time, like futuristic space battles and all this stuff. But it seems like they're doing a lot of exchanges in time space. I don't even know what that means. Like I get the picture of like, thought battles in some sense. Like, I don't know, like I wonder if there is a equivalent in third density. Like there must be a lot of like between our current nation states, there's probably a lot of like strategic thinking and like war games where like the military plays war games all the time where they like imagine going to war with like China. Like I know they do that. Like there's articles all the time about like, oh, in this war, and they did it for Ukraine, they did it for, and like, so I wonder if like it's like a more powerful extension of that in the higher densities where they don't actually need to go battle it out. They just like think it and then something happens from that. I don't know. I just find that really interesting.
Totally. Me too. Hey, would you be willing to read just the next Q&A 25.5 and then we'll keep talking about it because it talks about it expands on what your question is.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay. Questioner, you spoke of an Orion Confederation and a battle being fought between the Confederation and the Orion Confederation. The Confederation and the Orion Confederation. Is it possible to convey any concept of how this battle is fought? I am Ra. Picture, if you will, your mind. Picture it then in total unity with all other minds of your society. You are then single-minded, and that which is a weak electrical charge in your physical illusion is now an enormously powerful machine whereby thoughts may be projected as things. In this endeavor, the Orion group charges or attacks the Confederation arms with light. The result, a standoff, as you would call it, both energies being somewhat depleted by this and needing to regroup, the negative depleted through failure to manipulate, the positive depleted through failure to accept that which is given.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just wanted you to read that because it gives more specific details about the nature of what a battle in time space is like. It's not kinetic. It's not taking place with bodies. There's no bodies involved. It's purely mental. It's a mental war. And it seems to have to do with the sort of like power of the charge or the power of the desire for different ideas that all exist within one mind. The ideas of conquest and empire versus the ideas of unity and love and acceptance being battled in a single space of a unified mind. It's so, you guys, this is so interesting.
Yeah, it is. Star Wars.
Right. But Star Wars in a sort of like in a fantasy, or not a fantasy, but in a non-kinetic format.
Yeah,
Star Wars is very much space-time.
Oh.
Okay, so we've got BJ and then Mike. I see both of your hands raised. Let's hear what you guys want to say.
The piece, it's sort of just a response to Shang in terms of like warfare in time space, and this may not be accurate, but I sort of think of like things like internalized oppression is in some ways like a battle in time space, like anywhere that the battle or like the negative influence becomes internalized, where we carry it into ourselves, and we carry it out thinking I'm a victim without realizing I'm the one actually fighting inside myself. I kind of think of that as like taking place in time space. So I don't know if that is accurate, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking along the same questioning lines of, is it an energy battle? Because of how he says that it becomes this enormously powerful machine whereby thoughts are projected, where thoughts may be projected as things. I mean, is it the thoughts creating something, or is it just pure energy that's being directed at the other to do, to, on Orion's part, to manipulate? I don't know. That's the question I have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really fundamental question, Mike, about like, what are we talking about here? I think this little portion of the Ra contact where Ra talks about this battle and talks specifically about it taking place in time space is such an interesting way for us to learn a bit more, or at least contemplate a bit more about what is the distinction between space-time and time space. And also, what is the original thought? When Ra says we're all portions of the original thought, what does that even mean? We're portions of the original thought. We are not dancing in a physical universe. We're dancing thoughts. These are all clues to really like point to like what actually is reality, what actually is third density, what actually is experience in a body versus experience in our minds. For that matter, versus experience in our spirit complexes. What's the difference between those three ways of experiencing reality?
Wasn't the original thought the source thinking, what am I? And so us being portions of that were ways to go out and seek, what am I? Or am
What
I
about
lost?
the concept of infinity? Because the original thought, the word
I think you're breaking up too much to understand you, Nanette.
To acknowledge infinity. I don't know. To me, that'd be the original thought. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it came through a little unclear, Nanette. We couldn't quite make that out. I don't know why. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I can improve it because I'm in motion. But the original thought, to me, that would be the concept of finity, when the infinite conceived finity, because that was like the point of duality. Anyway, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
I like Mike's answer. No idea there.
Yeah, sorry, Nanette. We couldn't hear that last part. I did hear the part about finity, and then after that you kind of got a little unclear. So Sean, I want to circle back to you. Did you have any does reading that next part and this idea of the charge or any of that?
I just mean can you hear me?
Oh, okay, we can hear that. I just heard that.
Oh, good. Just the basic, what was the original thought, the first thing that was a thought? To me, it would seem to be the concept of finity by the infinite recognizing finity. That's all I had.
Right, got it.
I don't know if that's clear. And if not, just sign it on.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Nanette.
I like Mike's answer. Yeah. Thank you.
So Shang, I was curious if anything kind of clarifies or crystallizes for you when we bring into the conversation the what you just read.
Yeah, I have a similar chain of thought to Mike, where it's like, yes, it's being charged, thoughts are turning to things. Does that mean that the thoughts are manifesting in space-time? And there is a space-time, it's not purely in time-space, there is a space-time component. Obviously I'm not in the higher densities, I don't know, but thinking about it from our reality, like it all starts as thoughts, right? Like when we
I think it starts and ends as thoughts.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, like when I don't think there's any war that didn't start as a thought, right? Like would it even be a war if it didn't start? Like there must have been some intention and planning, right? Like all of the current wars that are currently active, there was planning behind it, right? It didn't just happen. Like
Right.
So is that like, so moving up in this and then like, so it starts in time space, there's like some planning intention, and then it carries out in space time. So is this the exact same process? Like it's just more like now, instead of like a couple like military guys planning it, it's the entire race thinking like, oh, we're going to go to war against this empire or this confederation. And then like through that thought, the things that manifest in space-time. Is that basically like follow exactly what Mike said? Like, is there that space-time component of the thing, or does it remain just thoughts? I imagine there must be. There's still space-time in the higher densities, right? There's got to be something happening in the space-time component.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I want to share something here, which is like, I mean, absolutely, Shang. I think that, thought, mental activity precedes all war. But not only that, mental, idea or thought precedes everything in space-time. Everything in space-time is a manifestation of some thought, whether it's conscious or subconscious. Everything that comes into form in space-time was preceded by an idea. And I think that's really, from my perspective, it's a clue into the order of operations of all of it, of the entire creation. One of the 7 Hermetic principles is all is mental. And, I think that points to this dynamic we're exploring now, like, the order of operations. There is nothing that comes into form that was not preceded by an idea. And a lot of how I think about this is influenced by what I learned from studying Walter Russell, which is, very congruent with what Ra says. But there's this very specific thing that Walter Russell says, which is that everything that comes into form in a very consistent way. And it's the mind of God, which we are all participating in, we're all a portion of. When we identify an idea that we're interested in, we hold the idea in our portion of mind, and then holding it in our mind with whatever degree of desire that we have for it, it impacts what Walter Russell says are the inner planes, or the inertial planes. And then that impact from mind vibrates out into space-time and creates it. So like literally there's this process of an idea that exists in time space being translated into space time through the inner planes, through the inertial plane. And the purpose of bringing it into form is to make it more vivid so that the creator can experience it through the body, through what we experience as the body. We can sense it. Once it becomes into form, we can sense it. So anyway, I'm getting a little off, not off topic, but you know, I know we're not studying Walter Russell here, so I don't want to get too deep into it, but not everything that is in the mind of God or in our subconscious minds or in our portion of time space, not everything gets selected to come into form. Like there's some things that just remain in mind and never get manifest into space-time. Anyway, I'll leave it at that for now. Mike, is your hand up?
Yeah, just a quick comment on what you were saying there. It is from multiple sources out there. I don't know where I get all my information anymore. I'm too old to keep it all sorted by author and this and that. But I've always thought that, you know, they talk about your thoughts and how if you have intention behind them, that yes, like you were saying, it creates it on a sort of like an interdimensional plane or vortex out there, and it won't really come into reality unless you have enough intention and enough energy behind it to actually create it. And so along lines with what he's saying here, Ra's saying about, you know, one person is just this weak charge, but when you have the whole mind of humanity or the whole mind of Orion working as one for one thought and one intention, it's very easy to bring that quickly, creating, you know, the thought creates a thing. So that's just what I was, along with the Walter Russell. I love to see all different people, different time periods, saying things that are congruent.
Right. Totally. Yeah. Hopefully I'm not hogging the space, but I want to say one more thing about this, which is, you know, I think a lot about what is the nature of the negative path and what is the nature of the positive path? Like fundamentally, at their essence, like what is the difference? Like, okay, they're both serving God. They're both serving the one infinite creator. Ross says that, but they're obviously like doing it in such a different way. And to us in third density, they seem like pretty incompatible, but somehow they actually are all part of the same impulse to serve the one infinite being. And one of the ways that I've made sense of it is that like on the negative path, there's an obsession with like my idea. So each entity has its own portion of God's infinite idea. And then there's an obsession about that. It's like my idea is the best and I'm going to go to war over it. And the positive path, it's like our idea. It's like a cooperative sense of like, hey, let's get together and make a harmonious expression of God's idea that we share or something. Like there's not so much of an obsession with my idea. There's a willingness to 51% service to other. There's a willingness to kind of like join my idea with the ideas of those around me and turn it into something greater. And it's like, that's like the essence of the positive path, is like the capacity to cooperate, the capacity to build something larger than my own individual idea. Because each of us are carrying a portion of God's infinite idea. And that's the logoic fractal structure. The cosmic logos, you know, its idea is God's infinite idea. The galactic logoi each take a portion of that. The solar logoi, the sublogoi, each take a portion of that. And then we take a portion of that, right? So it keeps getting more and more specific. But then on the negative path, generally speaking, it seems like negative entities are just obsessed with their own, what their, you know, with whatever their idea is, like that's the most important thing to them. But on the positive path, there's something that is more about let's join together. And so it seems like in this thought war that Ra's describing, there's a battle between those two dynamics, the dynamics of the negative Orion, whatever it is, this conquest, this like enslavement idea that they're trying to come forward with, and the Confederation idea of, whatever it is, like protecting Earth and holding open the possibility of free will and all these other things. But they all are taking place in the one mind. Anyway, those are just some further thoughts from me about it.
I see how, or at least in my mind, that if you're on the positive path, people on the positive path could be led to war because they think they're helping for the greater good, or people are having their free will infringed upon. So we go to war for them to help stop that infringement.
Mm-hmm.
But that could be an influence from the negative path. I don't know. My heart always says help others. Whatever you've got to do. I don't think I'd ever go to killing, but it's such a dichotomy for a person on the positive path to be so easily swayed to do something for the spirit of helping all others, but it might be a negative path.
Yeah, these are so relevant and deep matters and so close to heart. Yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying, Mike. BJ?
Yeah, I wanted to share that in 2017, Aaron and I went to a homecoming gathering at Ella Research, and there was a quote channeling that spoke about war, specifically war on Earth, and how that corresponds with war or differing, like balancing of polarity in other densities. And it was really fascinating to hear Quo talk about it, because I was just looking back at the transcript. Like they said, for instance, since Quo is representing a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth density perspective, they have these different perspectives. For instance, they say, upon this question of how polarities get balanced, Ra would say the polarities are harmonized. La Tui says the polarities are in the process of being harmonized, and Haton says the polarities are still in opposition to one another. Sadly. And I can share that transcript if anybody's interested, but to me there's a lot of juicy information in there about the purposefulness of the dark and the light, and just how to be with all of it. I'll drop it here in the chat, and then I'll put it in our Telegram group too.
Thanks, BJ. Sean?
I wanted to share an experience, basically reflecting what you had talked about, and about the polarities going to war, like what it means. So my mother has this. Okay, I think the negative polarity, the defining characteristic is that they think that they're right. And I have this difficulty with my mother, which is she's characteristically very controlling, and she thinks she's right, and she thinks she thinks what she's doing is good for everyone around her. And in her mind, which I think is my interpretation is this is a characteristic of a negative path, is like, I know what's best. I'm right. And by spreading this to others, I'm doing what's right. I'm doing God's work. She's also very religious. Whereas the positive path is, I think one of the key characteristic is acceptance of things that are painful to you, like, which is something I'm working on right now. But like, for example, like looking at the world today and just accepting it the way it is, that's really hard to do. And the relationship, when I read this passage of like the conflict between the positive and the negative, like the negative wants to, the positive can't accept like what the negative is offering. It really describes my interactions with my mom, which is she comes in my life, like sometimes we help her, we asked her to help us with Marcus for a few days, and by the end of like a week it's just exhausting, because it's like, oh, she's everything that we talk to her about, she wants it done her way. And it's and in her mind, and she's like, why do you keep fighting me? Why do you keep fighting me? You don't fight anyone else. I'm like, but nobody else tells me to do it their way. She's like, yeah, that's because nobody else cares. I care about you. That's why I'm like forcing you to do things my way, because I care. And there's no energy exchange there. It's literally just a push, like push and pull. Yeah. And it's difficult. Like this passage really resonates. Like it describes it really well.
Yeah. Well, I relate to your share, Shang, and BJ and I have spent a lot of time like unpacking our dynamics and what probably were our pre-incarnative plans for our life together. And the way we make sense of it is that it seems like, and BJ, you correct me if I'm wrong, but BJ is working out her balance of love and wisdom, coming into this incarnation with a love over wisdom bias, and I come in with a wisdom over love bias. And I often, when we get into tangle in our relationship, it's because I'm overly fixated on, like, I'm kind of doing what your mom is doing, Sean. Like basically, like I'm getting too fixed on like what's the correct way to do things, what's most efficient, what's gonna in the long run save us time or money or this or that. And I'm not focused as much on the quality of our connection, the quality of our relating. And I'm like, well, but we just need to do it the right way. And we're both learning a lot in our own balancing process. But I'm bringing it up because like there's questions up about the positive and the negative path, but there's also questions here about just like love versus wisdom. Like there's a part of like people who are on the positive path ultimately, but they just get overly fixated on, energy and efficiency and, calories and voltage and, just like measurable, like efficiency or whatever, rather than like kindness and softness and empathy and compassion, and so it's complex, it's like, I do agree with what you're saying, like people who get really fixated on controlling others, like, yeah, that does seem like ultimately like it's a negatively polarizing or at least depolarizing for a positive entity. But just from my own perspective, it's like sometimes it's just because there's such an over bias towards wisdom. It's not necessarily about metaphysics. It's about, well, it's not necessarily about positive, negative. It might just be about fixation on wisdom. Which I'm guilty of. Okay, I think we should keep reading to stay on track to finish the session. So I think we left off at 25.6. Anybody Feeling up for some reading?
I can keep reading.
Great.
Um, 25.6. Okay. Questioner, could you amplify the meaning of what you said by failure to accept that which is given? I am Ra. At the level of time-space at which this takes place in the form of what you may call a thought war, the most accepting and loving energy would be to so love those who wish to manipulate that those entities were surrounded, engulfed, and transformed by positive energies. This, however, being a battle of equals, the Confederation is aware that it cannot, on equal footing, allow itself to be manipulated in order to remain purely positive. For then, though pure, it would not be of any consequence, having been placed by the so-called powers of darkness under the heel, as you may say. It is thus that those who deal with this thought war must be defensive rather than accepting in order to preserve their usefulness in service to others. Thusly, they cannot accept fully what the Orion Confederation wishes to give, that being enslavement. Thusly, some polarity is lost due to this friction, and both sides, if you will, must then regroup. It has not been fruitful for either side. The only consequence which has been helpful is a balancing of energies available to this planet so that these energies have less necessity to be balanced in this space-time, thus lessening the chances of planetary annihilation. Questioner, very important point, I believe. Does a portion of the Confederation then engage in this thought battle? What percentage engages? I am Ra. This is the most difficult work of the Confederation. Only 4 planetary entities at any one time are asked to partake in this conflict. Questioner, what density are these 4 planetary densities? I am Ra. These entities are of the density of love, numbering 4. Questioner, then I am assuming that this is the most effective density for this work. Would this density, an entity of this density, be more effective for this type of work than, say, an entity of density 5 or 6? I am Ra. The 4th density is the only density besides your own, which, lacking the wisdom to refrain from battle, sees the necessity of battle. Thus, it is necessary that 4th density social memory complexes be used. Questioner, am I correct in assuming then that 4th density on both sides of both the Orion and the Confederation sides are in this battle, and that the densities 5th and 6th on the Orion side do not engage in this? Is this correct? I am Ra. This will be the last full question as this entity's energies are low. It is partially correct. 5th and 6th density entities positive would not take part in this battle. 5th density negative would not take part in this battle. Thus, the 4th density of both orientations join in this conflict. May we ask for a few short questions before we close? Do you want me to finish?
Sure, if you don't mind.
Questioner. Well, I will first ask the answer at the end if there's anything we can do to make the instrument really comfortable. I'll only ask the questions that the instrument has, or answer the questions that the instrument has energy left to give, but I would really like to know of the orientation of 5th density negative for not participating in this battle. I am Ra. The 5th density is the density of light or wisdom. The so-called negative service to self-entity in this density is at a high level of awareness and wisdom and has ceased activity except by thought. The 5th density negative is extraordinary, compacted, and separated from all else. Questioner, thank you very much. We do not wish to deplete the instrument, so is there anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? I am Ra. You are very conscientious. As we requested previously, it would be well to observe the angles taken by the more upright posture of the entity. It is causing some nerve blockage in the portion of the body complex called the elbows. I am Ra. I leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. Go forth then rejoicing in the power and the peace of one creator. Adonai.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2510.
Mhm.
This has confused me every time I've read this. So partially correct. Wait, no, not 2510. Is it 25? Yeah, 2510. So he's saying, so Dawn is saying, okay, so it's only the fourth densities on both sides of that battle. And Ra says, no, not quite. He says fifth, sixth density, positive don't battle. Fifth density, negative doesn't battle. So he's saying sixth density, negative battles.
Yeah,
what
that
he's
one
saying?
got me too.
I don't understand. I don't understand that. Like,
Well, I had the same exact question. I'm like, wait a second. It seems like they don't say it explicitly, but it seems like they're suggesting that sixth density negative somehow is a part of the battle. And I'd love to hear if anyone has any clarity about it. But one of the things that brings up for me is like, oh, right. Ra has said over and over again that the polarities are harmonized, the paradoxes are resolved from their perspective. And so it's like, oh, right. We tend to assume that Ra is like, they're on the positive path, which they are, I believe. But they also, it seems to me like they also kind of like, they know the Orion is part of them too. Like, I'm not saying Ra is of the Orion group, but it does seem like Ra sees the Orion group and knows that they're a part of them. That knows that they're, somehow. Anyway, it's not exactly addressing the question that you're bringing up, Shang, but it's like, it makes me think deeply about Ra, late sixth density, and the Orion group, or any negative entity. And it's like, oh, wait, they would have integrated that. The Orion group is part of them. The early negative portion of sixth density, entities that are partaking in that, like Ra would experience them as a part of themselves, I think. Nia?
So, something to consider. Fourth density is the one doing the battle because they have a structure to their density. They have more of a sensation of duality. As you just stated, the higher densities are closer to the folding back into the one in unity. However, what I read between the lines here is not what Ra has said, but what Ra has not said. More to the point that fourth density is the only one capable of a thought war. In other words, the mental that y'all were speaking of earlier becomes what could be translated into a psychic energy attack. That permeates those densities. And the idea that the fifth and sixth is not in the battling, as in they are not having their thought turn into what we would perceive as an energy attack. That's not to say that they're not having anything to do with it. They're still influencing. They're still in the hierarchy of, say, the emperor telling the troops what to do. Those of fifth and sixth density, negative and positive, are not making the attacks themselves. That does not mean they're not calling the shots. That does not mean that they're not having influence. So this one always got me as something I feel like Ra is biting their tongue, so to speak, around what they're choosing, how they're choosing to answer. I believe it's more in what's not said than what is said, because this is not the density of understanding. And Ra in this entire time is being very careful to not, have a mind-blowing, cataclysmic shift to cause mental emotional damage. In other words, we can't inhale an encyclopedia in one shot. We cannot, in our third density body spirit complexes, fathom those battles. So I feel that Ra is wording it very carefully. But again, that's not to say that those are not they're not taking part, as in they're not the ones shooting the psychic energy gun. They're the ones calling the shots.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question real quick? I'm sorry, Sean. Just for clarity, fourth density is the density of love. Fifth is the density of wisdom. And sixth is the density of balancing love and wisdom.
Correct.
But on the negative side, they skip the fourth density, correct?
No, they bypass the heart in their own personal energy systems, but they partake in fourth density. But the lessons of love are about love of self.
Okay, love of self. And so sixth density is balancing wisdom and love of self.
Sixth density is the density of oneness, in which you'll just learn to become one with everything. And
I thought that was seventh.
Seventh is the density of foreverness, in which you begin to unify with the creator. You start unifying with infinity. Sixth density, you're still seventh density,
bringing it all together in sixth.
Yeah, seventh density is falling into the black hole.
Yep.
But you're once you pass the event horizon, you're gone. You're not coming back. The sixth density, you're still in this universe, and you're still in time space, and you learn to see everything as part of yourself within this. It's preparation for falling into the black hole.
Yep.
Okay. I sorry to interrupt. I just wanted for the discussion to get it clear in my mind as to why maybe sixth density negative could still be participating in this conflict.
I have a follow-up specifically on that, which and a little bit about what Nia said, which is thinking through this. I remember Ross saying fifth density negative, not just fifth density negative, but like a lot of fifth density entities, they're not part of social memory complexes.
Right.
I think fifth density negative especially just leaves the empire because they're like, I'm way better. I don't need no empire. Like, I'm better off on my own. And like I'm way better than they go off and like do their own thing in like a cave. And I think that's why they're not participating, is because they're so isolated. And that seems to be what Ross saying here.
Yeah.
What is it? 2511 says they're separated from everything else. They don't participate because they're too busy. First, I think Ross basically says like, yeah, fifth density negative, they see everyone else as worthless except for their teachers. There's no point in them interacting with anyone. It's a waste of their time. They just focus on their own development with their negative teachers. But then once they hit sixth density, so early sixth density, they're still negative, and then by mid sixth density, there's no negative. And it's that beginning part, which is the confusion of the sixth density negative entity. And I think that's where the battle is happening, because I think once they hit sixth density, they're forced to interact as part of the density of oneness. I think the physics of that density mean they can't stay isolated anymore. So it's almost they're forced to now integrate with the positive, and that I imagine that doesn't go smoothly in the beginning. Otherwise, like the whole confusion in the beginning of sixth density negative, I think might be what Ra is talking about here.
Yeah, interesting. I appreciate all that. Well, and, just while we're on the just general comments about the densities, I just want to just presence that fourth density seems to be at the very beginning of fourth density. It's basically like essentially the same physics and conditions as third density. Like we have bodies, chemical complexes. By the end of fourth density, we have light bodies. And then fifth density is all light. Like fifth density, I guess fifth density entities can create chemical bodies if they want to, but they're completely in light. It's a completely made up of light. But fourth density is transitional. So that's interesting. Over the course of 30 million years, the evolution in the civilization would be from the beginning would be basically like where we're at now. And the end is like, you don't even have to have a body at all. And I find that really fascinating too. But then again, the battle that's taking place doesn't involve bodies anyway. It's a battle in time space, which is just mental and spiritual complexes are the only thing that exist in time space. But it's almost like space-time becomes less and less relevant the higher you go in the densities.
Is that because in fourth density, eventually we would only have, or will we only have, positive orientation here?
No, there's totally, they become independent. Like right now on Earth, they're mixed. There's one
Right.
civilization that includes a positive and negative seeking. But in fourth density, they split off, but they're still negative all the way through to the end and then beyond.
Right, but I'm just saying, like our Earth, since it's moving into the positive, it will only harbor positively oriented beings.
Right.
So you are isolated to your world, at least, as positive.
Right.
So if it was a war, it would either have to be an interdimensional war or a interstellar war.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Right. That's right. And I think the primary reason for that is because there's no veil. Once fourth density is fully in, the energetics are fully established and third density is no longer intermingled, the veil will be gone and there's no place for negatives to hide. There's no confusion about what the density or what the orientation of anybody is. You can just read it. You can just, it. So yeah, so it's interesting to me that there's only 4 planetary entities at any given time that take place in this thought war, members of the Confederation, but there's 500 planetary entities who make up the positive Confederation group. So only 4 of 500 group, planetary social memory complexes are taking part at any one time, and then they have to like tag out, because I imagine it's very, very difficult and painful, and yeah, I wonder how often they have to cycle out. I've got a question. Back in 25.6, the second paragraph of Ra's response, they say, this, however, being a battle of equals, the Confederation is aware that it cannot, on equal footing, allow itself to be manipulated in order to remain purely positive. For then, though pure, it would not be of any consequence, having been placed by the so-called powers of darkness under the heel, as you may say. And I just sort of like, I don't quite understand that. I wonder if anybody has any purchase on like, what does it mean? Like, what do they mean there? Like, if the positive beings were to purely accept, then they'd have to accept what's being offered by the Orions, which is enslavement. But if it's in time, like, what does that even mean in the context of time space? Like, what would it mean to accept the enslavement in time space? Anyway, just curious if anybody has any thoughts about that part.
It would be the same as third density, but with our consciousness and bodies of that density. It's the same. Enslavement is enslavement. The shackles and chains that would be put on a person's third density body would therefore be magnified because it would be on your entire being, your mind and spirit complex, but in a light body sense. It's the same. That's
like
why the light,
the-
that's why the positive path cannot accept that. It's a choice to, it's part of the choice. It's still on that positive, negative choice path. That's why the light has to fight. Otherwise, it would be pure enslavement all across the board.
Hmm. Yeah, I hear that. Okay, go ahead, BJ.
That doesn't necessarily resonate for me. I don't, yeah, I'm not sure. But it seems to me like, as far as I can tell within time space, what I'm able to do with my free will is where I put my focus, or what my focus is upon, which is basically what I'm interested in, and it's a refining of what I'm interested in. And if I take my interest into service so far as to say yes to whatever you're interested in, if what you're interested in is enslavement of my focus, then I'm not able to focus. I'm not able to like still utilize my energy towards love if what you're interested in is enslaving, which I think is enslaving my energy or my ability to focus on love. It's like this is what I imagine, like it's a restricting of my ability to still love, in a way, like it's a manipulation towards not acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an enslaving of my ability to love and accept. That's what I imagine.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when I hear that, BJ, it actually, I could imagine that being completely congruent with what Nia's saying too, of like maybe what it looks like to be so controlled in what you can put your attention on is, metaphysically speaking, chains or whatever. Like, anyway, it seems like those aren't necessarily incompatible with each other. Hi, Mimi.
Cool.
Hi. Hi, BJ.
Hi, Mimi. Hi, we're still in our Law 1 study group. This is not yet the reunion. You're
Oh, okay.
early,
I'll log out.
but nice to see
Thanks.
you.
You can.
Nice to see you
We're
too.
about
Yeah,
to
you're
close up.
welcome to be here. Yeah,
You're welcome
we're
to be
almost
here.
done.
We're
But just
about
to
to
let
Oh,
you know,
okay.
that's what's happening.
All right. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Likewise.
Well, any final comments or questions before we close? Well, I really appreciated that conversation, y'all. That was really stimulating and interesting for me. I really appreciate everyone's contributions and questions. So yeah, thank you once again for another enlightening, illuminating exploration. And it's 5.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, Nia.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much. That was really a great conversation. I enjoyed it so much and enjoyed talking with you all. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Nanette.
likewise. Thanks, Nanette.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, well, I hope everyone has a good week. Until next time, we'll see ya.
Yeah.
Love to you
Bye.
all. Bye-bye.